Welcome to Unboxing, Play and Profit for the Gaming Curious. I'm Laine Joost.
And I'm Joost van Dreunen.
And we're here digging deep on why games matter in today's economy. On the docket today, Friday, June 20th, we've got our wet-hot American summary of all three recent summer showcases and what, if anything, they have to say about the future of games. Plus, GameStop's latest pivot turns to Pokemon cards. Is this the booster GameStop needs, or are they just scalping for vibes? All that and more with your two very anti-fascist co-hosts, but first, we've got some catching up to do. I don't share these with you before I say them.
No, I just walk into these unarmed.
How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm watching with a degree of admiration the construction that goes on right outside my window. So 2 weeks ago they were still in the basement, and right now they're basically on eye level, and it's fascinating. I feel like I accomplished nothing. Here's like a group of 80 men just building floor after floor like it's, sheets of paper. It's amazing. No, it's good. I like the time of year in Brooklyn, so I've been spending a lot of time walking around with the kids. So yeah, life is good. What about you? What have you been up to? What about any kind of extracurricular activity have you been up to?
Any kind of extracurricular activity. This has been a 2-game week for the New York Liberty. I was at the Atlanta Dream game last night. We barely squeaked by with a win. Last Friday, I got a little out of the ordinary. Last Friday, I had a friend who had a spare Broadway ticket to a show they had gotten in the raffle or in the lottery. And so I had second row center orchestra seats to see Real Women Have Curves, which was not a show I even knew existed. I didn't know what this was. I went in quite blind. Have you heard of this, Joost?
Of several of these components make sense. I've never been to. I understand musical theater. I'm a big fan of musical theater myself, and I know that yes, it's one of the most. I think it's an ultimate art form. I don't know, or maybe it's because when I was a kid, I saw a bunch of them and I got really enamored. We saw Hair, and I saw the one with the trains.
One with the train.
Starlight Express. And it's like the kind where you sit in a sort of pit and then they roller skate around you and they sing and it's wild. And so it was always this sort of like, why would you do this?
It's like vaudeville siphoned through theater, right? It's extreme.
It's an exaggeration.
You might like Real Women Have Curves. I have to say, Joost, it was a rowdy crowd. I mean, so I went into this show not knowing anything about it. Apparently there was a film starring America Ferrera. This is like I have discovered in talking to people that this is like an iconic memory for many individuals. Mm-hmm. But the scene opens to a bunch of undocumented garment workers in late 1980s LA. And I was just like, oh my God, like it hit so hard. Because of what is going on in LA right now, because of all there was no way to like experience the play not through the present and all of the, rising rampant and also like awfully mundane authoritarianism we're seeing, political assassinations, Brad Lander gets arrested, etc. I just feel like we have to acknowledge it. That's all.
I'm with you. I think it's a wild moment. My version of this is that the fact that you have a current cup going on, a soccer cup, and you have empty stadiums because people are like, yeah, no thanks. I'm here for the game. And so what it does, it not only discourages a huge population of people to come to what is really a popular sport and should be for them and about them. It's also something that now kind of puts a huge question mark around FIFA and the World Cup that's coming up in the US. Like, yeah, I know you like your basketball. I'm a big soccer fan, and it's just like way to ruin the fun for everybody.
Yeah,
it's just like you see these empty stadiums. It's like, yep, that's what you get, and guess who's not going to be happy? So it just eats away at the very fabric, and I just have no understanding for that.
Yeah.
So,
We're supposed to be having an LA Summer Olympics sometime soon as
mm,
well.
yeah, good luck with
Yikes.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's as fun as the military parade I saw, it's going to be wild.
Oh, you mean all of those empty seats?
Oh my
And
god.
that grant, I was like, I think we did the opposite, which was not of the intended goal, which was not impress anyone. So, look, it does look rather like America is ripe for the picking. Ugh.
I worry about that always. Like, look, if my classroom is empty, it's just like, is it me? I always
Yeah.
wonder, like, have I lost my relevance? And then the same thing, I did a few talks in like Denmark and Finland, and what they didn't tell me is that, particularly the Danes, they don't like to talk in public. So you give your rousing 60-minute state of the industry, and you like you nail the punchline, you land that, everybody claps, and then no questions whatsoever, just dead silence. You're like, what did I
Well,
say?
they're
Did I
not like a Q&A. I was about to be like, well, where do they do their talking in private? But,
2 drinks in, all of a sudden Denmark opens up. But it's just like
okay.
it's very different in the US. People will just like interrupt you and heckle you and like talk over you, and you're just like, so that's what I'm used to. So you go there, you're like, oh no, I lost it. But no, it's the Danes, it's them, it's not me. So, anyways, I like in all of this the extrovertedness when you say musical theater, real women have curves. Like, my question was like, who is it for? Who is
It
that?
was so the audience was really diverse. I would say both in terms of like gender and sexuality and race and ethnicity. It was at like part of what was so satisfying and fun was that there were tons of black and brown folks who were very clearly getting a lot out of seeing jokes about their culture made by people of their culture, like not making fun but making jokes within. And they're like people like hooting and hollering to references that certainly went over my fucking head, you know. It was really, and getting to see that on Broadway, right? And you know, like what does serve the kind of his, you know, it's like, what do they got, like West Side Story? Like this I was like, oh, I get it, this is doing something
Mhm.
that, you know, it's how I felt when I first saw Rent, you know. um,
Is that your favorite one?
I don't know, it's my favorite. I mean, it's not my favorite, but it's very hyper nostalgic for me. I got into Rent
Mhm.
when I was a college student. When I was a senior in college, I got to take a newspaper. I was on I was the art director of the student paper, and I got to take a free trip to New York City. So I was going to the big city. I was like, New York, you got to go to Broadway. And I heard that there was a show called Rent about gay people. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anyone had AIDS until intermission. Like, I just, it totally went over my head. I showed up in like a cocktail dress. Like, I just didn't. I was like, you go to Broadway, you have to dress up,
Wow.
right? I wore
Wow.
heels, like
Wow.
toddling through the subway at the age of 22. And
Oh,
then
my
I like,
sweet summer child.
yeah, yeah, right.
This is
And then
adorable.
I bought the 2 CD soundtrack and just punished everyone else in the newspaper group playing that. The sports director shared an office with me, and he like was like, if I have to listen to 1,000 Kisses one more time, like, they
That's
were
so
all
good.
they were, you know, surprisingly patient people with me. I was really, you know, I went to college in Southwestern Ohio. There was not a lot there for me, so
Good for you.
um,
Oh,
Rent is a soft spot.
I think for that exact reason, both culturally and like it's a voice, it's a subcurrent. My favorite thing was always Jesus Christ Superstar.
Oh, it is so good.
That's just, I mean,
Yeah,
it's basically a rock opera. I mean, it's
yeah.
so good and it's written so well, and the diverse, like the different music styles. It's so fit. I've
Yeah,
loved that. I
the
played that one.
movie is outstanding too. It's super fun.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, well, now that I know this, it sounds like we need to go see some musical theater together, Yost.
I'm in. Let's go.
That's content for subscribers only, but
We'll do like a Discord group and a paid tier, and at the end of the season, everybody gets to come.
yeah, right.
We'll go to a musical.
Oh my god, do you want to talk about game shit? I mean, I'm having a good time, but
We should segue
we should segue
into
into
game. Well,
Q.
into
Oh,
performances elsewhere, into
yeah,
game performances and the
yeah.
performative nature of the games industry.
That's right. What a smooth Like peanut buttery smooth transition. Yes.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes.
All right. Cue that funky music.
We're getting pushback from the production
From the
booth.
producer. It's not clear that he's pleased. All right. Okay, so Yost, we have had a triple header of game industry pageantry this spring, kind of over the past month and a half, right? Summer Games Fest, the Xbox Showcase, the PlayStation State of Play, which is not a thing I want to say 3 times fast. These are events that are supposed to set the tone for the next year or the next generation of gaming. Now, I think that if we were a lesser podcast, we would get into the weeds of like every trailer and game release and reaction. We'd be talking about what game is our favorite, and but that's not what we do here, right? We want to understand the context that all of these events are setting up, because there's a way of thinking about them rather as kind of like there's a portrait that all of them are that each one has individually and that they kind of all have together, right? These are kind of different takes on where games are going, right? What are these showcases trying to tell us about what's the kind of argument they make about where they think games are going that lies underneath their kind of their shiny clips and trailers and transitions and their new hardware devices and whatnot, right? So what kind of future is each of these companies selling? Do we buy it? And so Yost, I was wondering if you could kind of, what I might turn to you for right now is kind of break down these events by kind of what their position is within the industry. What role do they each serve? I think it's very easy to sort of, unless you're really deep in the weeds to kind of know how to distinguish like this company's whatever from that company's whatever from whatever Joff Fest or whatever it is, however you say that first name, right?
There you go.
Just
It's like the complicated way of saying Jeff.
Ja, ja, ja.
And,
I just think about Prince Joffrey from Game of Thrones.
that's well, that's one reference, I suppose. I don't know if that's the popular one. So let me ask you one question: have you ever been to E3? I know you have been.
No,
For a
I
while.
was too much of a baby child, I think, to ever make it to E3. I wasn't when it was happening. I was not important enough to be at E3. So no, I never got to go.
Okay, so E3 was always around this time of year historically since 2 decades or so. And what it was originally was a retailer show where you would go as a publisher, show what you had to sell, and then a retailer would go, "Yep, I'll take 1 million copies, please," and then you would sign a big contract and you go home to your boss
Yep.
and be promoted or whatever. And so it became then this spectacle where, of course, they turn on the heat. They would collectively showcase the new titles, and it becomes this sort of circus for like a week in LA where you have Nintendo and Sony and then of course later Microsoft and all of the major publishers. And they would have these massive booths, right? And it would be, I mean, if you've ever been to any kind of industry event, it changed its character over the years, but it was always a big to do in the Expo in LA, and you could sort of tell what everybody was about that year. So you could tell that EA would put their main thing front and center, and then it had a bunch of smaller titles to the side. You could see the new thing that Nintendo had in mind. You could try it out. You could stand in line and try it for 5 or 10 minutes. And the main thing was is that you would have access first as media, and then later they would introduce sort of the general public.
Yeah.
But you could touch it, and you could talk to people, and you would have meetings there, and executives would sort of nose around, and for a couple of days you could just like talk to them. And so you'd see like the CEO for EA, it's like just kind of in the wild walking around. So it was this critical mass, this moment, and it kind of grew out of proportion and then eventually collapsed. E3 is gone, as we know.
Yeah.
And since then, a lot of, particularly the major players, have been looking for avenues that allow them to showcase their new stuff to consumers and everybody else, what they have in store for the year to come, in a way that's still interesting and relevant. So E3 started to transition a little bit to more like off the beaten path showcases. So like a Ubisoft would rent out a movie theater, and like Take Two would do its own thing somewhere else. And so you'd have these different venues, and then eventually kind of like, okay, so it starts to disintegrate, and then they start to go online because the big affordance, or perhaps the constraint was like you could just see all that stuff in an hour and a half live stream anyway. So eventually the question is like, why would I go to any of this, which is expensive, and depending on how you feel about downtown LA, it's not necessarily a great place. And so it's just like, okay, well, I'll just stay home. I'll watch all the stuff online and make my summary on that base as a journalist or whatever. So it started to fall apart. And then these companies all start to kind of develop their own thing. So the big replacement in general terms was Summer Games Fest.
Yep.
That's the one that Jeff Keighley started up. And he said, so he does the video game awards, or the game awards, the
Oh
TGA.
yeah, we know about that.
That's a big one. That's one more in the winter. That's and that's the award show where everybody has some public statement to make about why they're better than other companies, and get the recognition they deserve to some degree.
Yeah, we have to. This gets inaugurated the year one of COVID, right? Or year two? God, wait, was COVID 2019 or 2020? I'm losing my mind.
You don't know when COVID
2020.
was.
I
Just
mean, some people would say COVID is still happening. So 2020, there we go. It's been so long. Right? So it
2020.
starts in the context of also this dramatic shift online, right?
Yes. So the industry kind of changes its center, right there. So there's no digital or online equivalent that we used to have at the central E3 conference. So Summer Game Fest became the cooler sort of it sounded like a picnic at first, like, oh, let's all have a picnic and talk about games. It was sort of like away from the corporate machine, a little bit more casual. And as E3 was fading, it starts to replace it. That was the mainstream one, or how to say, the collective one, the shared one. And then the major platforms that they've always done this at E3 too, they would try to always carve out their own sort of channel, their own sort of corner in that. So you have for PlayStation the State of Play, and it doesn't really try to pretend to be a replacement for E3, but it is a 2 hour long showcase of upcoming titles. And then Xbox does the same thing with its showcase, where they announce a bunch of stuff and they have hardware. And here comes Sarah Bond, and she has something to be excited about. And so it becomes this sort of weird in between what used to be a consumer show, and then in the same week, for instance, you also this year had the worldwide developer conference from Apple,
Oh
which
yeah.
which is of course its own thing altogether. That's like Cirque du Soleil among the rest of us jugglers, right? And so
Oh,
it's
that's
just
right. We've got Apple Glass now, right? Like we're
Mhm. It's but they do that so well. Like Apple events are phenomenal. Tim was coming over to announce some new, slightly better
Tim.
phone. Tim Cook.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know who Tim refers to. I was just making fun of
Timothy Cookery.
your your first name reference to Timmy was coming over.
I like to bring people down to just people, like you know
Yeah.
like CEO is an obfuscating term that means nothing. But Tim, it's just Tim, like sitting over there having
He could be your friend.
he's having a beer. Or I don't know if Tim's into beers, but it's the showcase of, and like these giant buses show up and they roll all this stuff out, and it's all Apple for like a good 48 hours. But so they are phenomenal when it comes to organizing events. The games industry is still finding its groove a little bit. Like there's no Apple equivalent in gaming, and so
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
these events start to kind of become
Interesting.
necessary, but also you kind of have to ask, like, well, is that interesting? Is there enough
Okay.
here,
Okay.
right?
So
And so
that's a good overview that kind of puts these into the broader perspective of these as kind of industry specific activities. Now, what do you think each of them? Let's start with Summer Games Fest, right? Kind of what is the collective argument being made there about what is it about what we have to look forward to? Is it supposed to be about a kind of future leaning process? What do you think the kind of the ambition of an event like that is?
of Summer Game Fest is to
Yeah.
provide a channel for people to promote their new stuff, right? To celebrate games. It's probably in the text there somewhere too, but mostly to showcase and give the industry a moment to introduce consumers, particularly consumers, to like the new stuff coming out. The big gripe with E3 was always that was a physical show. It was always about units and like physical cartridges, and then over time, digital and mobile became more popular, and people said, "Well, why isn't that at E3?" And so Game Fest was really, oh, we can now include all that stuff, right? As the games industry is 80-90% digital now, all of a sudden, like you need to have an avenue that matches that somehow. So that was the big thing, like a shared live streamable, cool event that showcases for over the course of several hours all the new stuff coming out.
Yeah.
It's the question is, of course, like how interesting is that to watch? That's my like who's gonna sit through 3 hours of that stuff and by the end feel highly informed? You know, the, it's hard. I have respect for Jeff in doing it because it's like, how do you make that interesting? How do you make a program out of that that's not boring or repetitive or just trailers one after another? And they do a pretty good job of that, to the extent that you can, but it leaves no agency for the consumer. And I'm so used to walking around,
Mm.
poking at things, checking out the line. Like that was always a
No
big thing.
agency for the consumer. That's such an interesting kind of statement of a product, right? It becomes pure broadcast, right? There's
It's
not
very
a,
passive.
I mean, there's a chat back channel or whatever for this kind of stuff, but that's not, yeah, you're right. It's not the same, right? What were your takeaways from this year?
It's There's a lot more coming out than I thought. Like it's like, which tells you that it's either not expensive to promote,
Hmm.
so maybe it's cheap, or there's just a lot of people trying. It feels a little bit like the industry is trying to make up the difference, like the decline in overall spending, by just flooding the market with content, which is the opposite of what I think you should
Ooh,
do.
yeah, that's like that. All that will do is further like spread out and fracture kind of possible
Right. There's now fewer
revenue
people
channels.
spending less
Yeah,
money, and here's more stuff. You're like, okay, well,
yeah,
how do you retain value? Like, how do you get the critical acclaim as a creative, or how do you get the commercial value? How do you capture value as a business? And so it feels a little commodified. It feels a little
yeah.
abundant in a
What's
moment of
the what's the
austerity.
kind of spread at something like SGF or between, let's say, what we might think of as kind of AAA or AA production versus indie?
Yeah, that's excellent.
That's what
So
I'm here
it's
for,
no, you
to make your rambling structured.
speak for yourself. It's no, so it seems to me like most of there's just a few AAA announcements, but mostly it's repeats. Like EA wasn't really there with a lot of presence. Take Two announced the new Mafia game, but we'd already heard and seen the date for that one, so that wasn't new. It was sort of there. Ubisoft didn't have a big presence, so the sort of legacy publishers are largely absent. They could do a bigger job, a better job. The announcement of GTA 6 a couple of weeks prior was, of course, the big news there. So all of them are kind of present, but not front and center, not in the way that it used to when you'd walk into the show floor and that's where they would all be. Like the first thing you'd see was EA or like a Take Two.
Is there something about the kind of reversion to trailers that has a flattening effect on the level of scale a publisher can really produce in terms of, right? I mean, the showroom floor is an interesting space, right? Because square
Mhm.
footage has such a direct relationship to industry power, right?
Mhm.
Whereas with these kind of this kind of, extended clips and trailer version of these showcases, everything becomes very flat, right?
It
Stuff
becomes
that
flat.
looks better or cooler or better graphics or whatever, but you don't get that same sense of this was certainly how I felt watching the Xbox showcase. Was just like it felt like a fever dream or something. It was just like a long, extended. Watch these pixels move, and then those pixels move, and I was like, "All right." At the end, I guess this is games. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant. But there's no agency, right? It's like I'm very excited for all these companies and all their cool stuff, but it's like you blasted at me, and here's the next, and then I mean, one particular gripe that's minor, but I think relevant is like what Xbox did with the showcase. Is like every time a new title comes in, world premiere, Xbox, and and like after like an hour of you're like, yo, just like it reminds me of that one ad, applied directly to the forehead. Remember that? It was like this internet thing in a while ago, but it was like the way to get attention is just to repeat the catchphrase 3 times in a row. You're just like, this is
Mm,
so. It becomes distracting. Let's put it that way.
yeah,
And what is different from a physical show is that the big appeal from going to the expo was like you get to try the game for like 10, 15 minutes. There would be a playable level
yeah,
or a demo, and you'd stand in line for an hour so you could play it for 10 minutes, and then you go back in line and try to get. That's what BlizzCon is all about, right? That's what these real life in person events are all about. And so while we still have the glitz, we have none of the tangible experience. And so it's very hard as a consumer, as an analyst, as an investor to get a sense of like, is there something here? Or is
Yeah,
it just like a minute and a half of like the best footage from the game?
yeah.
And so you
That
don't
you
get the whole
rendered for a trailer, right? Like,
exactly.
right? There's
Is
so
it
little more.
Grinder
It's
or
like
Bumble or
Bumble.
the
Yeah,
League?
and the last time you thought about apps, dating apps, was like
Listen,
2021. It sounds like I can't
uh,
even begin to discuss like Hinge or Field with you,
ooh,
her. I don't know.
ooh.
There's some other shit I probably don't know about.
So do you then are they mutually exclusive? Like if I'm dating in one, can I date in the other, or do I have to
Yes, yeah,
pledge
that's pretty
fealty to
typical.
one?
Is that you move? Is that you usually have accounts in several because they.
But then wouldn't everybody do that and you just run to the same people?
Yeah, so it's not uncommon to run into profiles of people that you recognize from other apps, but
Hmm.
there's some apps will draw certain constituencies more than others. Like if you're into like poly queer kink, you go on Field. If you're trying to find a wife, you go on Hinge, but people from either will show up on different, right? Like, sorry,
No, I'm like
I
fascinated.
just broke
What
Yoast a little, but
what if I want to like
and that
make
means that poly kink is Xbox. That's how we circle back
that's how we circle
to.
back. You know, I could that's there's a whole master's thesis in there like making these
Yeah,
comparisons. Okay, that's sort of helpful because it's you in effect like look at these things like you have already committed my 2 hours to watch Xbox, and then the next day you can just watch for some media outlet to summarize it for you in 17 minutes on YouTube, and it's cool too, but it doesn't really inform in the way that it should, and it takes away a lot of the ritual that made it so
yeah,
rich and exciting. Like as a culture industry, it
yeah.
should have it. So
And
even
the
though it's
kind of
bigger,
human relationships that would inevitably emerge at these events, particularly for the people who worked in the industry, right?
to talk to the fans, like how exciting is that? I remember like I mean, this is a nascent, or I say adjacent to esports. I remember going to Barclays for the Overwatch Championship, and the Mike Morhaime was in the house, and so they put a spotlight on the man, and the whole place goes nuts. 5,000 people like yeah, and so what a wonderful thing for a creative to have happen, that recognition, of fun for everybody. So it's like you take that all away when you don't have these consumer accessible events, and they're all scattered.
Maybe then the idea of kind of what arguments are these shows making makes more sense applied to something like the Xbox Showcase or the State of Play, where you have a company that has a strong kind of curatorial, sounds like feels like too strong of a word, but an industrial perspective, right? Trying to kind of shape discourse around what's going on. How would you sort of compare and contrast those two events?
Xbox and PlayStation.
PlayStation.
Xbox is trying to elbow to the front, so it's a much bigger production. They lean in much harder, and they got like these exclusive announcements. They had the announcement of the handheld that they're launching with
Yeah.
the Asus thing, and it's like okay, that's all very cool. Whereas PlayStation very deliberate says like, yeah, we launched this, but it's not supposed to be this front and center thing. In fact, PlayStation has been taking a backseat on a number of conferences. They're never really in big numbers at GDC.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
used to go to Paris Games Week. They would be one of the big sponsors. They stopped doing that too, I believe. So it's just they've gotten out of the consumer circuit. I think everything is now focused on, say, Joy-Con, etc. In Asia, and Gamescom in Cologne
Yeah.
in Europe. Like the Americans don't really have an equivalent conference, which is too bad. So Xbox is trying to play front and center. They have real announcements. They make a real production out of it. They have all the executives kind of say a bunch of stuff and get some Q&A going. They're very available to journalists everywhere. And PlayStation takes a much more low key approach, which is an interesting one too. It's like why wouldn't they promote it harder? But I think they're in a transitional period, and they're not launching anything new to buy. So for that reason, I think Xbox did a bigger show. I don't know if rather. I think that there is sort of a metaphor here with, But if you think about how these companies should all be joining together, they would probably gather a bigger crowd than they could each do individually.
Yeah. 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 Rather, I mean, well, then you've just recreated E3.
Imagine that.
And it does feel like one of those things where it's like, oh, we're going to reinvent trade shows, right? Like once we
Mhm.
realize that people are sick of distributed trailer events, right? For sure. What did you think of the? I also like. I could not like dropping the ally during Pride. Come on, Xbox.
Well, I'm gonna let you speak first on that. What's
No, I wanted to ask you what's your. I mean, I hung out for quite a while in the Reddit boards trying to, getting an understanding of the anger and outrage that this is not a handheld console. This is a PC that plays Xbox games,
hmm
right? Like that tension, right? That seems very important
hmm
to people for reasons that are maybe a little in the weeds for me or for most
well,
consume. I mean, I get it, and also this kind of orientation toward convergence and the dedication around console identity feels like these things are gonna, are on their way out, right?
it's interesting that you said it. So the handheld is one thing, and then they also announced, and so it's a portable PC as they position
Yes,
it.
yeah, yeah. It's like it runs Windows,
hmm
right? So it's a portable PC that is kind of with the all of the Xbox cloud gaming stuff built into it.
It's that, and it echoes very strongly the announcement earlier this week, which was the partnership with AMD, this chipset maker.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's like, why would they do that? And it's this vertically integrated thing where they're, of course, optimizing the silicon to facilitate cloud gaming and all that. And that's great and important. And also illustrated with a phrase from Sarah Bond saying, making Windows the best platform to game. Or whatever, and it's just like, what? So this is an observation by Tom Warren from The Verge. Well, so what happened to Xbox? Why are we talking about Windows now? Well, but it's like so, and so you could make the argument between those two announcements. It's like, wait, so we're pushing into Windows
yeah.
as an ecosystem as opposed to
As a
Xbox as a brand that like a Netflix kind of brand where you like here's all the content that we have. No, it's
yeah,
like Windows meaning like you live in this world now. And I
yeah.
find that is one of those moments where you look at these conferences and announcements and like, what are they literally saying? Because you know that they have 50 people like go over all the phrasing for all these things. That is not an accident that Sarah Bond mentions Windows as a gaming platform as opposed to Xbox. Right? And
Yes.
so I'm curious what that indicates and what that's going
Yeah.
to look like.
I found the launch commercial for the Ally really interesting, right? So it starts with this kind of translucent kind of brick,
hmm
right? And then it I can't remember if a hand reaches. I do think there's hands in it, right? And then they kind of touch it, and it molds into the object, and then suddenly there's like buttons breaking out of the form like glass, and it was just so curious to me that like I thought about the comparative commercial when Nintendo launched the Switch, and it's like when Nintendo launches a console or let's say a handheld gaming device, right? What they foreground are people, context, and practices of play, right? Like that video where it's going from the players, it like jumps across all these scenes of people taking their Switch different places. They're playing on rooftops, they're playing in garages, they're playing in their living room.
hmm
It's just like wildly cool, deeply multicultural, embracing lots of different play styles. And the Xbox trailer it was about a fetish object, right? Like there was nothing about actually playing that was a part of the advertisement for the device, right?
hmm
It was about it as a kind of technological performance piece, which felt telling to me in some way about who they think their core consumer is, why they're picking up this, and in that sense felt less interesting and less inspiring, I think, to me than the kind of marketing we get out of Nintendo. I know that these are very different companies. It's not an apples to oranges comparison, but we're talking in both cases about how we sell a handheld to a consumer market, and you're getting very different visualizations of what that means.
Oh, 100%. Like it's very much two different schools of thought when it comes to design and positioning and strategy. You know, I mean, it's almost unfair to compare Nintendo, the new Switch to the PlayStation Portal to the Ally. and say like, but it's just they're all manifestations of the DNA of each of those companies.
Yeah, yeah.
And like you would never see Xbox come out with this multicolored toy-like thing because they would rather be caught dead. Because it has to be sort of tech forward and like futuristic and have like some quasi, strong edges and like the
Yeah, I think
announcement went a little long on the button
I'm
too.
too old to get excited about like a button. I'm just like
Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself. I love a good button. I have so many joysticks. We
like
should get.
just the shatter effect is just like really stuck with me. I was like, wow,
Wow.
games are like video games are like bombs, isn't it cool? Like,
I want to feel it in my skull. We should talk about haptic feedback at some time with
oh
someone.
yeah, yeah. Well, we can always bring on friend of the podcast, Dave Parisi, sometime soon
There
to
you
do
go.
a little haptics roundup for us, maybe.
Because I think that that's a big piece of it. Like
Yeah.
that's a like that. At some point, it translates from the physical into the digital, but there's like some kind of tangible component that helps you get there.
Hmm.
And I don't find all these. I mean, this is my problem is that I am now a grown man and I have giant hands. So like a lot of the Joy Cons, like what even is that? Like I can't use that.
Oh, too delicate for your big
No, I'm too
hands.
clumsy. I also stopped texting on my phone. I just dictate now because whatever. I'm done texting. There's no more
I
typing on the
want I
screen.
want an assistive Yoast texting device that just has like big, the screen's really big so it can handle all of the giant letters. You know.
I'm turning 50 next year. You can kiss my ass. I'm not doing anything.
I mean,
I'm
it's true. Like, there's definitely a generational thing happening where, like, these tiny UXs, we all want bigger captioning text on our video games. We
you
don't want
know
to read tiny 9-point text in Elden Ring. Like, don't make me do this.
And then like the
Um,
social stigma of it. Like I don't want like there was a time when I was like, oh, on my phone it's better if I put the text size really large because then I can comfortably read everything that's going on. And so while driving, that's incredibly helpful. But it's like in public, he's standing somewhere, it's like, and your phone lights up with like giant letters. It's like, all right, grandpa. It's like, so I was very self conscious about this, like, but it's so much more convenient and efficient.
oh my
And I,
God.
and I,
No, I
I
just
stopped giving
remembered
two shits
an
about that.
amazing anecdote from my weekend that I didn't share earlier,
Mm.
but that has to do with like assistive devices. I went to vote on the first day of early voting. Rank Zoran, don't rank Cuomo. Um, and I fucked up my ballot twice. I had to have my ballot voided 2 times
Because you can't
because
read.
because well, first of all, there's like 40 fucking bubbles to fill out because it's ranked choice voting. Okay, and as a left-handed person, my hand covers the names of everyone in the list and it covers the ranking I've given everyone previously. And so, despite me trying so mentally hard to focus, I like 2 times over gave someone the same ranking in the chart. So, at the second time that you have to go to the voter booth and tell them that you need your ballot voided and you need another one, that's when you become the least popular person at the voting booth. Like, the staff are not pleased. And this man was like, listen, if you mess this up a third time, you're going to have to go to court and to like fill out an affidavit to get your ballot replaced.
With the
And
other
so,
left-handed.
and he was like, you may have an easier time with the ADA machine. They sent me to
Nice.
a machine for folks with visual and physical disabilities. Like, because they were like, you can't mess it up. You can't like mark something twice on so you do it on a computer screen. It's very tedious, but
Mhm.
it makes it impossible and also because it's set at wheelchair height, I had the ballot is so long I had to kneel on the ground to fill it out. Like, it was just they were really done with me by the time I left.
Nothing's ever easy with you, Laine. But it's wild though that like like if you're left-handed, you're basically at a massive disadvantage. Was it the first time a left-handed person voted?
I
That
don't.
just
I haven't heard that any other left-handed people have had this problem, but
it's just
that
you
is
then.
my excuse. I mean, I also tried to argue that. I was like, I'm left-handed, and they were like, me too. What's your problem?
Oh my god. No, but good that
But
they have accommodations for that.
it's yeah. I may actually use it permanently from now on.
Hmm.
as my alternative for filling out the ballot. But anyway, that was such a good anecdote. I felt like I had to
I
share.
like that. I appreciate that.
What's next? What are we talking about next, Yost?
Speaking of things coming out of left field, is that a segue?
Speaking about things that don't work,
Speaking of things that stopped working, GameStop is now
GameStop.
it's stopped doing what it's supposed to. So no, the original segue was of course like you go from an E3, which is a retailer focused event that has companies like GameStop, a specialty retailer, take front and center because they place big orders. Nintendo's success is historically, at least in North America, tied very closely to GameStop because that was its channel. Like unlike Apple, Nintendo does not have its own retail distribution network. Unlike Sony, that has all this network and supply chain and value chain economics, Nintendo does not. So GameStop was pivotal, and for the longest time, of course, they've been pretending like digitalization wasn't going to hit them, but of course, eventually it did. It's sort of a well documented transition, but what's interesting is what they've done since. And so you'd imagine that GameStop should be long gone by now, like Toys R Us,
Yeah, I mean, like Bed Bath and Beyond or something.
Bed Bath and
Like
Beyond, Macy's.
yeah,
It's like
Walden Books.
all of it was a big thing, and the retail experience was always this sort of club where you would find like-minded people. I imagine you had a few of those stores too growing up, but GameStop was certainly part of it for a lot of people, and so they are dying, but they refuse to go away, and it's really interesting because it's, I don't know, maybe a symptom of late stage capitalism, but it's actually making quite a bit of money, and the reason is that they are very smart at what they do. So they got a new CEO a couple of years ago called uh,
Ryan Cohen.
Ryan Cohen.
He was the founder or co-founder of Chewy,
Yeah, one of
the
these like
the
pet food
yeah,
e-tailer.
like online, like you order your pet stuff and it comes to you in a box kind of
Yes,
company. And he sold that for however many billions of dollars.
right. And so he
Huge.
is this wunderkind or whatever, according to some people. He can turn companies around. He's financially very savvy, and he's going to help GameStop be more successful now. So they put him in charge. But the thing is like they don't really sell games so much anymore.
Yeah.
So they posted their Q1 earnings. They had a 17% drop in sales, but they had their adjusted profit was up. So
It
they're
was their
basically,
first profitable quarter since 2019.
there you go. So you've read it too. The profitability is up, sales are down. That means that they're cutting costs like crazy.
Yeah.
And so they've
That's
been,
why people in Staten Island are stapling receipts through the screens of Switch consoles.
yes, it's like perhaps the clerk quality level has suffered somewhat, but that's no longer its primary business. What is its primary business is that it now holds $6.4 billion in cash. So for a dying company, 6 billion or so is not a bad amount to have
In cash?
in cash. So they got savvy. You remember during the pandemic that GameStop became a meme stock, meaning
Yes. I
all
mean, who
these.
could forget?
And so
Dramatized in the film whose name I am forgetting.
okay, when I don't remember the name of the film either, but it's the let's run back the meme stock moment, which is they had a bunch of people with nothing to do on the internet in a Robinhood account, basically collectively going against the short selling that was going on. Everybody had figured out that GameStop was probably going to decline, so they were all wagering on this. You had these large funds making the bet that GameStop was in decline, and that's how they were going to make money. And then the internet came alive and started buying it, pushing the share up, and basically putting a lot of these like Wall Street investors out of business or making
Yeah,
them look bad,
pressuring the short sell. Yeah.
pressuring the short sell, and it skyrocketing the GameStop share price. This was all documented, and now I know that you remember the name of the movie. In the movie called,
Dumb Money. Seth
thank you.
Rogen, Pete Davidson, Paul Dano.
There you go. And it's a really fascinating moment. It's very polarizing for a lot of people. Like, should that have happened?
Yep.
Why is it that big companies have more access, better access, can manipulate the market in the same way that these people have done? Blah blah blah. So it's like this weird moment that you find yourself in. But one of the main drivers was they call it influencing by a fellow named Roaring Kitty. a former Wall Street analyst type person, like investment or financial advisor of sorts, and he was pushing it. He was rallying on Reddit and all these kind of communities, and that was part of it. GameStop, under leadership of Ryan Cohen, was basically figured out, it's like, you know what, we can do this. And so they bought their own shares to drive up the price, benefiting from a second spike in the share price. And that's what started their big cash coffers that they have now, long story short. So they got privy to this idea that it was a meme stock, that people would be totally impressionable around it. And they leveraged that to their benefit and just created this cash hoard. Never mind the games business, they just
Yeah.
now are
Yeah.
a
It's a
giant fund.
financialization machine of a certain type. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's really interesting because when you talk to analysts and most investors, say like, yeah, they don't really have an operational turnaround plan. They're just kind of doing this now. They don't even do management calls during earnings. They just send out the PDF that they're supposed to because of the SEC, and that's kind of all you're going to get. And so, really, what it's become is a what used to be a specialty games retailer is now a private equity fund that sells Pokemon cards, like, or host LAN parties. Maybe, like, it's just really
What is the advantage of even keeping the retail arm? Is that, do they need
collab.
it in order to be kind of legally understood as a
That's a good
like,
question.
would they become a different kind of entity if they didn't have it? Is that the,
It's I don't know
like, would
if
they
that would
fall
be the
under
case.
banking law or something like that if they didn't actually have
It's a good question. I think it is, maybe it has something to do with collateral. But like, okay, you have all this real estate and all these contracts, and so that you could like leverage and borrow against that or whatever, so that gives you a tangible footing. But what they've done since then with all this money is, for instance, they've bought almost 5,000 Bitcoin. So, it makes you kind of wonder, it's like, what am I doing wrong? Why do I still have all these things that actually make, why am I sitting here like making, but they're just like a giant fund just, and so they got permission from the board to buy, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And they're just doing that now. They're just speculating on the stock market, in a crypto exchange.
yeah.
So, you know,
That's cool.
what do you make of that? Is that a healthy future for retail? Is that what
I
everybody should be doing?
mean, the other part of this, right, is that that call also included, that announcement from GameStop also included, was it earlier this week? Last
Mhm.
week? Yeah. Was that a new retail pivot? So GameStop has been many things, right? Once it was it was the retail store where you bought games. For a while it
Mhm.
tried to be like a cell phone service provider. It's owned meme coins, it's sold NFTs. I always think, every time I've ever been in the GameStop in Union Square, it looks like the most desolate, terrifying place on earth. Just like an explosion of like half opened Funko Pops everywhere. Like, are there even games here? Who knows? But they've announced that their new pivot. So like, there's two things going on, right? There's this kind of crypto stuff that is, I guess, what the company is primarily managing, and then there's this interesting kind of retail fig leaf in which they're gonna shift their focus to trading cards, to Pokemon cards, sports, and sports cards, collectible cards, as what they consider a natural extension of their target market. So unlike if we've seen the dematerialization of the industry showcase, right?
Mhm.
GameStop is countering with, actually, we need to find the thing that is tactile and physical, right? Which is not, the software has gone online, but the cards are here to stay, right?
Mhm.
Higher margin than hardware, because obviously you produce them for literally nothing, and they can be, hardware almost has no margin, basically, right? That's not how that part of the industry works. And yeah, has a obvious tap in with GameStop's kind of existing customer base, right? Investment response was negative, a 22% drop in the stock after the announcement. I don't know if that's kind of corrected at all in the past few days, but let's say that whatever, the analysts who are evaluating it seems maybe kind of, I'm interested in this contradiction where, because on the one hand, Yost, you're like, actually, this company is thriving on Bitcoin, but is that not part of its profitability portfolio, right? The stock drops nonetheless. Like, are we all in agreement that either the retail end of this does or doesn't matter, right?
It's a good question. I think companies like investors like companies with a lot of cash, and so kind of how they got it, who cares? If they'd been in the hot dog business and they got out of that, does it matter? And it's while it's sort of my initial reaction is like, this is terrible. How dare they? Blah 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 blah. But it's a hollowing out of an institution of sorts because these retailers, and that's not just GameStop. That's like Twin Records. You go to a Blink gym, right? On 103rd. Okay, so I
Don't
believe
tell the fans where I'm at.
the groupies. Well, then don't say the
My
actual one.
Oh yeah, I go to the one on Lafayette.
Yes. So that one used to be at Twin Towers. And Twin Towers was famous. Twin Towers, Twin Records. Yeah,
Do
nice,
you mean
nice.
Tower? Do you mean Tower Records?
Good God, yes, I do.
Okay,
So
just
speaking,
checking.
so that's my senior moment. Tower Records. Tower Records is very famous for being this sort of hotspot for people that love music.
Yeah,
Particularly in San Francisco, like you could go and hang out and like listen to records and apparently do drugs all day long. There's a documentary on HBO somewhere, and it's but they were these like institutions where people would come together. GameStop was the same. Like you would hang out, you would go check stuff, you would go play in the kiosk, like all these different games that came out. And so that was what GameStop used to represent. And now it's this sort of investment vehicle that nobody asked for.
yeah. I mean, GameStop hasn't been that for 10 to 15 years, right? At least a decade. I mean,
It's been pretty disconnected, and they had some
yeah,
internal struggles. I think their CEO suddenly died, so there's been some stuff that they really couldn't foresee. But it went through a
yeah,
midlife crisis, and then found this like fast money solution. And it's like, I'm
yeah,
getting this
yeah.
red convertible,
And
and you
now,
guys,
now we're selling Pokemons.
it took a shot, and it went all the way to the bank. I think.
Of course, there's a lot. There's definitely been a lot of global trading card hype. There's been these like Pokemon heists that have happened. All of it's a vibes based strategy, but it does. If there's any company
Uh-huh.
that's going to do a vibes based strategy, this would be the one. I think I have like two thoughts about it. Right, like one of my concerns is, I mean, first of all, we'll see how earnest any of this is, right? But like, I do, if there's a worry I have, it's that the kind of at least the kind of existing footprint retail monopoly power that a place like GameStop still does marginally have would push out like actual community spaces where the kind of stuff you're talking about really does happen, right?
Mm.
There are places in New York, right, and in many other cities across America that are like kind of locally or small chain owned stores, right, where you buy your board games, where you play, where you go and play Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, or like these kinds of collector shops that are really cater to the community in a way that GameStop, I can't even remember the last time I thought of it as a company that wasn't just trying to like figure out how to liquidate a buck out of a dime, um and so I would hate to see this pivot actually endanger companies that are kind of earnestly working with the game playing community, simply because what GameStop is able to do at scale could
Mhm.
push them out. That's one thing. The other is, I just kind of wish that like there's an alternative capitalism moment here where I'm like, what if GameStop could degrowth? Like what if we could have a different kind of fantasy about what this looks like, right? Cohen gets on this call, he says, well, we're collecting Pokemon cards now. Stock tumbles, and that's universally reported as a bad thing. And I'm like, maybe, could we have a different narrative around downscaling? Right?
Mhm.
Like this, there is no way to bring this back as a retail experience, right? His kind of like meme stock trolling identity, his anti DEI bullshit. Like,
Mhm.
this is not a guy who's going to lead a company into making meaningful experiences for customers who aren't chodes, So I
So,
don't
so,
really
so you're saying
like.
you don't like him?
I'm saying that this is a guy who's gotten lucky a few times, and I would not extrapolate that to understanding what to do with a consumer, right? Um,
Yeah,
am I going off too much?
no, not at all. I feel like that's probably correct. This is I started by saying this is late stage capitalism. Like it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
like it's not about actual value creation; it's about
yeah.
value capture, and he does that so well.
Yes, he does. I mean, he's really good at it, right?
And depending on like,
Um,
what you're proposing is like, sort of like a sort of traditional economic exchange of goods and services for money, and that people like benefit and profit from this, and
or
there's
that
like
or
rules.
that also we could find a way to kind of ratchet down the kind of mismatch between valuation and what a company like this can actually provide, right? There's an alternative way of thinking about what it's like to allow a company that was once a titan in its industry to have a smaller footprint, right? But that's not how any of us are trained or kind of acculturated to talk about it as anything other than a story of failure. And it's like, I
Mm.
don't really think that has to be a story of failure, right?
It doesn't have to be, and a lot of these times, like it's just like even if the whole thing gets shut down and declared bankrupt, then they just take the brand assets and resell
Yeah,
them to the next
yeah,
fund or whatever. So it's like these things kind of have a way of like coming back to life somehow. But it's certainly interesting that it's become entirely separate from, it's like a true meta game, right?
yes,
It
yes,
has nothing to
absolutely.
do with the actual
Yeah.
grind of the economy. It's you sit on top because of that position, you get to do all these things. So the shares actually jumped earlier this week. It
Oh,
was up 3% because they filed an 8K filing, and that was an hour ago, I guess, and they have completed a private offering of 2.25 billion in convertible senior notes,
what?
which is basically them taking a hoard of cash and they're going to spend it on bitcoins. That's the short version of it. So, and Bitcoin, if like it's currently trading at like $111,000 per
Yeah,
Bitcoin. So whatever, do some math. It's the, so it's just a numbers game. It's a money game, and it has nothing to
yes,
do with actual games anymore. So I find that interesting. I think, the sad part is probably like, in order to keep its profitability up, it's probably going to keep reducing its retail footprint and lay off people. So
yeah,
it creates a lot of uncertainty there, while the top layer, the fund itself, the $6 billion in cash, continues to grow wealth.
yeah.
It's like, okay, so maybe, is there some other way to be?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's an interesting rebrand ahead of us. Like
I'm hoping that the midlife crisis that GameStop is currently experiencing will soon come to an end and reach that sort of next stage of enlightenment and generosity.
oh, like it could just drive its convertible directly into like
Or maybe like share the convertible with people that aren't as
yeah,
well off. So, anyways, but so did the but my own version of this is like, that's always been the case in the system that we live. So it's good to know who they are. Like, at least we can see them now. I feel like it's it's not about the consumer. It's not about the publishers. Nintendo is very happy with them still because they sell stuff through it. But they also started, Nintendo, if opened its second retail store on the West Coast now, and so
oh,
which I don't think is an indication of a strategy that they're going to build their own retail chain. However, if you had to offload your reliance on GameStop, this is a good time.
if by second do you mean its second store globally or its second storefront on the West Coast?
In the US, there's
Okay.
one in Midtown here as well.
Oh, that's right.
You
Yeah, I
should
forgot
go.
about that. I visited the mothership. I went to the Nintendo store in Tokyo.
Oh, excuse me.
It
Well
was
done.
yeah, that was like it was like diving into the molten core at the center of the internet. It was like I also didn't know like I did not know how many like Nintendo like Mario and Kirby character branded washcloths could exist.
Right.
Um, Unbelievable, you
Yeah,
know.
it's a business, man. Like, that's their main market, and it's like a national icon. It's like the Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, yeah.
Or whatever. We
It
talked
was
about.
like one of the most thronged stores I had ever been in. Yeah, it was crazy.
Well, so here's the buttoning comment, which is, since the Nintendo Store in the US is in Midtown, it's just steps away from a variety of different venues that have Broadway musicals. So maybe as part of the field trip, we can go first to the store. We can all get a Mario doll or a Yoshi stuffy, and then sit in the audience watching Chorus Line or Rent, whatever you want to watch.
Chicago, you know.
And we're gonna watch Chicago. Okay.
Gypsy, I don't know. I think Audra McDonald's run is still
I want
going
to see
strong.
Lion King. Lion King was fun.
I've never seen
It's,
Lion
it's
King.
really good. The costumes are phenomenal.
All right.
And I have a friend. She dances in Wicked. She has a
Oh,
part in Wicked. So it's like
whoa.
so I gotta watch that one too.
All right. Um, wow, you really brought that, yeah, full circle.
Yep.
Is there a GameStop in Times Square?
Ooh, I don't even know. They
They might
shut
have.
down the one on 14th Street. I know that part.
Oh, they did. Oh, okay. Well, that
There's a
place was like where people go to die. So that place was
that's
grim.
that's yeah. No, it's a
I
that,
took a photo in there once because it was like so despairing, and I like put it in my slides for GameStop in my class. I was like, "This is GameStop, guys! Like, there's just
renting
boxes all over the
renting
floor."
that place was a dump. But then I had someone from Rockstar in my classroom one time who told me that to rent out for 2 weeks the front window of that particular GameStop was $1.2 million
Oh my Christ! All right,
because of its foot traffic. So
yeah.
we're
Really?
doing something not wrong.
What do we got in the world of pounds and owns, Yost?
Ooh, is it time?
It's time.
Let's see what we got today. I'll go first, and I will generate for you a poem out of. Oh, did I have the own this week? No, I
No, I
had.
had the own. I had the good one. You
Okay,
have
so
the pwn.
my poem this week was that the Financial Times, to which I have been a subscriber for years, ran an article, and it's an article that's alludes to like here's the type of games that executives play to stay on top of their game, quote unquote. It's a lovely metaphor. And so
Whoa, I
I
missed
was
this.
I was very excited about this. I was like, all right, now I want to learn some stuff because I do generally believe like gameplay is great for like mental acuity and like it keeps you sharp and like you should totally play your Wordle puzzle every day, you know, because it just kind of keeps you going. And it's the fact that they only refer to Elon Musk in that context of all the people they could have picked out. It's like that, I thought that was worthy of a poem. It's like you have done no homework whatsoever.
Wait, they only talked about the play habits of Elon Musk.
Yes, for when in regards to like a tech executive who plays video games, you're like I can think of so many other people, but that's just me. But then to pick him, so desperate,
What was the story?
it was basically like they play poker, they play pool, they play competitive league somewhere to just keep their wits and stay social and kind of like they're like I imagine top executives are kind of like athletes that they're competitive at work
So
and
there was
everywhere
lots of
else.
claim that executives do these things, but the actual example was Elon Musk.
There was a bunch of different categories that pointed out, and it's a let's see. There was, for instance, like poker was one, chess was one, tennis was one. So it went by type of game. Golf and football is another one.
But like,
And
what was their methodology? How did they know this?
it's they talk to some of these executives and then say, oh, here's how we work together as a team. This is how we learn. Like I'd say executives. What was the game? So there's lessons in football on how teams play together, and so the sort of microcosm of play and how it has relevance for like
The
executives.
deepness of the eye roll I'm giving you right now.
I know. Like
You know,
chess is about thinking ahead and so on. Like
um,
Peter
the,
Thiel is a chess master.
it's almost like it's like asking tech people what they play. It's like I'm like that's not the juice, man. I want to know what like let's get some other industries in here, right? I want to know what like people who sell on the home shopping network are playing. I want to know what people who do like multi-level marketing are playing. I want to know like like just think a little more broadly
Hmm.
about why people might be like think counter to the assumption of the socialization of the social identity of a tech executive, right? Like I
Hmm.
bet there's some really interesting answers from people who are not who are that close to the game industry, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
I
anyway,
totally agree.
ugh, that sounds like,
Well, I mean, who
you
made
know,
him like the representative? Like, I would like to unelect him, but I
and
guess that's a
didn't
broader
isn't it, I
metaphor.
mean, it's documented that he cheated, right?
Oh, Path of
On
Exile too. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one thing.
cool.
Absolutely. So there's
Oh,
there's a lot to complain about here, and I appreciate that they give us a shout out at the end of the article. But gaming is far
they
more
give
relevant.
us, like you and me.
No, the games industry as
Oh.
opposed to like poker, right? It's like let's spend like half an article talking about gambling style games where people lose their livelihood, and then talk about the culturally relevant thing for the
I
next
was like, we
generation.
got mentioned in the Financial Times.
Yes, and Lane said, "No,
I don't like it.
I don't like it.
All
I
right,
can't see." Sorry. All right,
listen,
so that's my
listen,
poem.
Twin Tower Records. I don't want to hear it from you. Okay,
It's just that's like the end of school. My big kid has one more week. I'm just like, yo, I'm at the end. It's
it's good you're
fantastic.
playing Wordle to stay sharp, Yost.
Well, as a side note for this, it's like the Atlantic now also offers
Oh my god, I
games.
just saw this. And I need to go check. But I was also like, God, what don't we need from the Atlantic? Games. Like,
No,
is
we do.
Ian Bogost involved in this? He must. Like, I don't want to go anywhere near this. But
You know him. Give him a call. Get him on the pod. What's going on, Ian?
get him on the pod talking about games at the Atlantic. So funny. My own for the week is also a article. It was an op-ed that ran in the New York Times. Usually, I tried to avoid the New York Times, but this was by Jun Lee, who's a sports reporter for like ESPN, the Bleacher Report, Washington Post. Wrote an article called $4,785. That's how much it costs to be a sports fan now. And so on the surface, it presents as a piece about kind of how expensive it is to be a sports fan, but it positions that analysis within a larger critique of private equity. Basically, what Cory Doctorow would call, enshittifying sports, basically, or the experience of watching sports. That's not language that Lee uses. That's me bringing in Doctorow's kind of terminology there. But I think the analysis holds, right? The principles are the same, right? So Lee is he's over the course of this very nice, long, well-written op-ed, he's talking about how sports have gone from sort of public rituals to privatized assets. They were once experiences that brought communities together, and now they've been kind of fragmented, particularly in the streaming viewership market, to these kind of exclusive overpriced subscription silos that are really about private equity interest, short-term ROI. And this is now kind of the fact that you have to subscribe to like 4 different services to watch all of your team's games is kind of by design. Basically, the fact that private equity can now have minority stakes in sports is also part of what's driving this, right? As well as everything from ticket pricing to broadcast access. I know this is a concern. As a Liberty fan, you're talking about a fan constituency that for a long time, it's been cheap to be a Liberty fan, right? And that meant that it could really foster a community of fans who were, lower class, working class, Black folks, queer folks. And that demographic is like rapidly changing. And I, Caitlin Clark Bros aside, I think there's a lot of, it doesn't feel good, right, for that to be true, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm excited that the W gets more attention, and also really anxious about the potential for enshittification of the fan base, right? And so, and for Lee, this kind of he argues this produces a sort of generational fracture where you can't pass down fandom anymore because everything it's been delocalized, right? Especially if there's the expectation that you're subscribing to these 3, 4, or 5 different subscription packages, right? Certainly capitalists have these rights, quote
Mhm.
unquote, but it hollows out something that was important about local and community sports practice. So I just thought it was like a beautiful little essay. And worth a read, right? I think its analysis is right on, and interestingly, it offered solutions, which would include things like a federally supported free streaming app for
Mhm.
local broadcast sports, designating key events for public broadcast, kind of like the UK does. So deciding that some events are of the national interest and therefore should be publicly viewable, mandating affordable local simulcast, capping streaming prices, banning blackouts, stuff like that. So just like a nice place where games and money and policy conversations intersect.
That's fascinating. I'll start with the fact that you are subscribed to the New York Times, and I'm
not. This was shared as a free link to me.
Interesting. Okay.
I unsubscribed from the New York Times during Trump won.
I imagine you did. It's there's a lot of mixed feelings there. So I'm sure it's the All right, but so then I do know that you also are a big fan of basketball like that. So to kind of see it run into these money problems early on. I mean, this reminds me of is a little bit of like cable companies fighting over rates and then nobody getting to watch any hockey.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's like it. I mean, to loop it back to the beginning, but so like seeing empty stadiums. Of course, it has to some degree to do with like a very unfriendly, like foreign traveler policy and sort of these ICE raids is terrifying people. At the same time, is also the tickets are just too expensive. Like it's $100 just to get in, like $300 to see anything. It's just sort of who has $300? It's like it stops being this populist activity, and you're just getting in the way of people playing and people watching people play. And I think that's of course it should be monetized. Of course, it should have advertisers and some monetary strategy, but not to the extent that it eats into our ability to even just watch it or have fun here.
Yeah, and you certainly know that the players are not necessarily ones walking away with the bulk of that income.
Exploitation. That's I think the word.
Exploit. There it is again. All right, man. Next week, we'll see you next week, right? Joost, you're not disappearing? I'm not disappearing? You're around?
I'm
all right.
Dad. I'm on my station.
Okay, then we will see each other, and we will see all of you next week. Until then, good night and good game.